Let me leap straight in. From the year 1459, a series of accusations of Vauderie, which is Waldensianism originally, but here applying in the 15th century to the new sect of diabolical witches, began to circulate in and around Arras, the populous urban centre in the north of France. The events of the Vauderie are recorded in two principal sources. The first is a defence of the inquisitorial position at Arras, the Recollectio Casus Status et Conditionis Valdentium Idolatrum. This short treatise survives in two manuscripts and was probably written by the Dean of Arras, Jacques Dubois, though we don't know. The second text is the memoirs of the Burgundian chronicler Jacques du Clercq. He's very much unsympathetic to the Inquisition. So these are the two sources that I'm going to be speaking about today, one pro-inquisitorial, one anti-inquisition. I want to approach the question of inner lives through details of these texts. Some small moments in these texts do, I think, articulate one of the principal methodological difficulties of approaching inner lives. That is, the moment that interiorities are investigated, both in the past and in the present, they're no longer interior but exterior. This is a point a number of scholars have made. Take, for example, Dallas Denery in relation to subjectivities constructed in the process of the sacrament of confession. This is not interiority in any simple sense of the word. Our materials are always mediations of the interior that construct an agreed exteriorized construct of interiority. That said, I also want to hold this in tension with a position that allows historians to encounter, through traces of exterior actions, the beliefs and affective experiences of historical agents as mediated through objects, images, gestures, words, cries. How might we do that? That's the question which I'm going to think about a little bit. Now, one place I think we can look is moments when the horizon of expectation of historical agents is suddenly altered. My example from the Vauderie comes from the distressing accounts of the sentencing and execution of the accused Vaudois. The fullest accounts of these events appear in Leclerc's memoir, but the details here align almost completely with those recorded in the Recollectio. They seem to reveal the inquisitor's desire to make as exterior and public as possible the secret actions of the heretical Vaudois. So we have a sermon preached outside the bishop's palace in Arras, with the accused there wearing paper mitres like this one from a different example, Jan Husser's execution, showing their homage to the devil with the details of their meetings of the Sabbath. Another text from this same milieu illustrated with scenes of the homage to the devil. So after we have this very public sermon, the accused then confirm the truth of these accounts by confessing that these are true accounts. And at this point, the inquisitorial construction of the interior world and the exterior world are very much in harmony. At this point, though, the accused are told that they're going to be handed over to the secular arm to be executed, and it's here that dissonances appear in the accounts, dissonances which are registered in both the anti-inquisitorial chronicle and the pro-inquisitorial treatise. Leclercq records that a group of accused Vaudois, some women, all of whom were prostitutes from Arras and surrounds, and some men, including one of their supposed leaders, a guy called Jean Levitte. So he records that this group was brought to the town hall in Arras and condemned by the échevinage of the town to be burned at the stake. At this point, Leclercq has the women cry out to a lawyer, Gilles Flamand, who'd assisted in their torture, that he was a false traitor who'd deceived them, telling them that if they confessed, they'd simply have to undertake a penance of pilgrimage. They protest that they'd confessed under duress and after these false promises, that they'd never been part of the Vauderie and they didn't know what it was, in fact. At the stake, they then commend their souls to God and ask those who they see in the crowd who know them to say masses for their souls. Now, I think we can construe something of a lived experience here, a gap between expectation and reality which calls forth powerful emotions from the accused. But I have to stress that I do not think that this is access to interiority in any naive sense which attempts to efface Leclerc's narrativization. Leclerc's narrative positions us undoubtedly to sympathise with the accused. So what I'm trying to say is that the details of the women's voices from the text can't be magically transformed into a real presence of the past. An analogous position here is played out by the crowd present at the execution, who are positioned as divided between those who think that these women have been wrongly condemned and those who think that their actions are yet another attempt by the devil to deceive. And in fact, these attitudes of the crowd are a neat textual dramatisation of divisions between the Inquisition and Leclerc's own position, which you can't transfer onto a social reality. What makes me think it more likely than not, however, that the women's reactions could be seen as signalling real tears in the fabric of their earlier interior expectations and a shift in their real affective register, is the presence of worrying at the problem of their actions, which permeates the inquisitorial text, the Recollectio. This text spends significant time addressing the question of how the devil prompted those accused to recant their confessions at the last moment and to undertake pious actions at the point of death, including, quote, invoking the sweet name of Jesus and calling on the saints, end quote. Here I think with Abbe Warburg that the devil steckt im Detail. Here the exterior is read as masking a secret demonic interior aim to undermine the Inquisition and to plunge the souls of the Vaudois unconfessed into perdition. The most striking instance of this comes in accounts of two male Vaudois, both of higher social standing than these women. The first is Jean Levitte, whom I've already mentioned. He was apparently a painter, a composer of ballads in honour of the Virgin Mary, and a member of a Carnival confraternity. The memoirs record his crying out a Latin phrase at the point of his death. The phrase is Jesus autem transiens per medium illorum ibit, so Jesus going through the midst of them went on his way. The second guy, about whom we know a little less, was a guy called Colin de Boulecourt, who performed a self-administered viaticum at the point of his execution, eating handfuls of grass or dirt which he'd consecrated in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Colin's action doesn't leave a trace in the Recollectio, it's only recorded in Leclerc, but Levitte's Latin is referred to, quote, and when there are great rabbis in the sect, they proffer the following words, but Jesus, passing through the midst of them, went on his way, end quote. Now, this particular phrase, we know, appeared in numerous forms across Europe as a protective text. It was attached to coins, here the first example, Edward III's gold noble, caskets, like these from the 15th century, signet rings, like these examples from Italy. And in the writing in this manuscript here, Per Medium Illorum, and we have other examples from various 15th century books of hours. And a last set of examples, medals, this badge probably for a horse's harness. And for people who work on later periods, the text appears also in this amulet from the British Museum in the points of the star. Now, the use of the text at this point in the trial was, like Colin's action, a calling forth into the exterior world of an alternative horizon of expectation to that which had been prepared by the Inquisition. Instead of the soul being snatched by the devil in death, instead one tries to reinscribe oneself into narratives of divine protection. And I think there's a Eucharistic element here which an object like this, a Pax Viaticum from Spain, might reveal, which also has the text Jesus per medium illorum ibat, to be worn probably on the side that faces inward to the chest of the person who wears the pyx. Now, Levitte's action is, of course, has an effective charge. Crying out words of protection at the stake is unlikely to be an emotionally disengaged action. even if we believed that any such thing as effective neutrality were possible. But again, that effective charge is impossible to recover. We have a potential exterior revelation of an interior conviction, but how was Jean's affective state made through the act of speaking? Did it transform an affective state? Was it premeditated? Was it made in hope or fear? Or perhaps more likely with confused, mixed and indeterminate feelings, something which historians of emotions are increasingly interested in rather than taking emotion words, thinking more about the ways in which emotions are bundled together, mixed and indeterminate. We'll never know this about this statement. For the Inquisition, though, we can read that they read this moment as just another devilish detail, one which showed how the sect of the Vaudois would commit a fraudulent denial at the point of death, at the devil's insistence, cementing the soul's place in hell. Now, a last detail from the Recollectio's account of Jean Levitte. But first, a little observation on details themselves. The Recollectio really follows the script of the 15th century diabolical witch sect. But what interests me methodologically is also the way in which, like inquisitorial registers, the chronicle also veers into specific telling details from Arras to make its broader argument. As others have argued, details, anecdotes and cases are typically the site of recounted emotion in historiography, and often seem to spill out of the form of the text through the writer's own emotions. Now, of course, all this apparent outpouring of internal emotions is in fact a kind of generic and rhetorical effect made through the form of the anecdote, the detail. Now, to return to Levitte, the author's argument in this example is that accused witches don't make deceptive accusations about their fellow witches. Jean Levitte here appears as failing to accuse someone he particularly hates of the crime of witchcraft. The implication being that if he were making opportunistic accusations, he would have accused the person he hated most, but he didn't. He instead accused someone who he didn't really care about, didn't have some kind of effective relationship to. Here's the passage from the Recollectio. Jean Levitte, quote, "As he claimed, hated and was hated by only one man, an inhabitant of Tournai, who had taken his wife from him 22 years earlier. And although he would have preferred that one die rather than himself, he always said that other man was not of the sect, nor would he accuse him of being a member of the sect." Now, this is an emotional detail, perhaps offering us insight into a fraught love triangle and a resentment nursed for 22 years. But again, even if we accept this as a moment of revelation, we're faced with the production of this detail under torture. Strong emotions are here produced under strong duress and very much in a public situation. How were they really felt? Was there really only a single person who Jean Levitte hated in his life? This detail, which emerges fleetingly and in an extraordinary situation, perhaps only offers the Inquisition and us as readers the illusion of a real access to an interior emotional world. I think, though, it might be read as an example of how a kind of interiority could arise in these sources, not on Jean's part, but on the part of the author of the Recollectio, the inquisitorial author. For Levitte's answer was a very unexpected one in the usual 15th century plot of the witch as someone possessed by pride, lust and vengeful wrath. Jean, as it were, denies this plot. And this is another potential gap between expectation and reality, which I think is sidestepped and managed by repositioning this troubling detail not in a section about the diabolical hatred of witches, but instead using it to imply the credibility of the accusations produced by witches. The problematic detail is made unproblematic by its inclusion in one of the tract's most emphatic arguments, that inquisitorial and judicial processes can be trusted when dealing with the deceptions of demons. Its inclusion, though, remains evidence that this gap between expectation and testimony needed to be handled through the work of writing itself, writing, as I take it, always involving both interiorization and exteriorization, the making of the world through the act of textual production. It's in this last sense of thinking about inner lives that I want to conclude today with a further suggestion about the relationships of the details of the Vauderie d'Arras with another kind of inner life, the inner life of the Dominican inquisitor as an author. Dominicans in the 15th century were faced with the problem of interiors and exteriors in a very particular way. Presenting themselves to the world as defenders of orthodoxy, they were internally split over their internal reform. Observant reformist Dominicans held to strict adherence to the rule of St. Augustine, which specified, among other things, the regulation of movement, particularly nocturnal movement, within these reforming houses. They positioned brothers who resisted reform as dangerously undermining the purity of the order. Now, might we read the excessive nocturnal travel and sociability of the sect of the Vaudois as involving some elements of projection of this internal Dominican debate into the realm of the fantastic, that is, the lurid meetings of the witchcraft sect? There's another possible layer here. The reforming inquisitor might believe very strongly in the need to maintain monastic enclosure, the limitation of movement, while themselves travelling very widely across Europe pursuing heresy. Some of the leading authors on the new diabolical witch sect, Johannes Nieder, for example, Nicolas Jacquier, were prominent in the reform movement, while all the while travelling on embassies to combat the Hussites or to advocate for crusades. Could we read the obsessive 15th century interest in the reality of the Sabbath, and more particularly travel to the Sabbath, as the exteriorization of an internal dissonance, not only within Reformed Dominican communities, but also within the Dominican Inquisitor themselves? In this case, the public texts emanating from the Inquisition become documents which are also working on interiorities, bolstering the need for mobile inquisitors in the face of an internal insistence on stability of place. In this case, the details of the debate over night flight, whether it be demonic delusion or demonic reality, are of secondary importance. The real demons might be, in this case, the Dominicans' inner demons. Here, demons testify to the need to make sense of the dissonances in the social world, dissonances in Dominican identity and for the reforming inquisitor. And it's on that rather kind of elusive/elusive note that I'm going to end.